Very nice of you all to come in person. We got lots of registrations, but a lot of them were for what's it called? Online participation. There were very few people that were willing to attend in person. So thanks to everybody, and special thanks to Dr. Bhatt, who has agreed to sort of preside over this session. Dr. Bhatt, could I invite you to the dais, please? So Dr. J.R. Bhatt is a well-known personality, in this space, but and he needs no introduction. But just to formally introduce him, he's a scientist G in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He is the designated national focal point for the IPCC Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research and National Communications, and their biennial update report under UNFCCC. And he represents the Government of India on climate change and biodiversity related issues, both nationally and internationally. So welcome, Dr. Bhatt. Please, we are very glad to have you with us. I would also like to invite some of our GHG platform members to the dais to be alongside Dr. Bhatt. I would first like to invite Karthik. I think Karthik, I and Nikhil are the only ones who are the remnants or the relics of when the GHG platform began. And since then we've kind of, so I hope we are not considered fossils because of that reason. But yeah, good to have you on board, Karthik. Karthik is the fellow and director on research coordination at CEW. And he has been involved in the GHG platform since its very inception. Good to have you on board, Karthik. I would like to also call Dr. Indu Murthy to the dais. Dr. Indu is the sector head for climate, environment, and sustainability at CSTEP. She works on climate change, vulnerability, land-based migration, adaptation, resilience, etc. And she's also on the governing board of the South Asia Consortium for Interdisciplinary Water Resources Studies, as well as she's one of the very few roster of experts at the UNFCCC for GHG emission estimations. Welcome aboard. Good to have you on the dais, ma'am. And then we have Nikhil. He's the other fossil along with me and Karthik, who's been sort of part of the GHG platform. Nikhil is the senior engineer for energy and climate team at ICLE, South Asia, and he works on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate mitigation. And he's been involved in developing solutions and low emission development plans and green growth strategies for several urban spaces in India as well as abroad, especially I think Malaysia. So welcome, Nikhil. We were also expecting Mr. Ajay Raghava, so he will probably join us in a while. And yeah, no. So that was the plan, that we start with a sort of a welcome and a context setting, and then we go on to your keynote. So maybe we can invite people in terms of whoever is sitting, next to Dr. Bhatt. So immediately next to Dr. Bhatt is Dr. Indu Murthy, and so you can start, or maybe Karthik would want to start. Yeah.
Thanks, Raman, for the kind introduction. I guess most of the faces here are familiar. They're all patrons of the GHG platform initiative in some way. So most of you also know of the work we do. I think the big challenge that remains is how do we make this platform known outside of the group that's here right now? Because you've all, of course, supported us over the years. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to do it. Thanks to, of course, the funders who support this initiative. I think the important thing is, as far as India's GHG emissions reporting is concerned, Dr. Bhatt, of course, is in charge of the national reporting that goes into the BUR and the TNC. But there is no sort of independent process, and we approached Dr. Bhatt, I remember about now 4 years ago, when we did the phase 3, right, to showcase how this compares against national emissions inventories. And, he was pleasantly surprised that, an independent entity, a group of independent entities could come up with an estimate that closely sort of matches what Government of India affiliated agencies are able to come up with. That said, I think the positive and the bonus of what the work that we do is that it is reproducible by anybody because the data is all there. It gives you very granular information, Dr. Bhatt. I hope, this is, of course, comments that we've been giving you for many years now. I hope eventually at some point, Government of India will decide to make the data that it publishes as part of BUR a lot more granular, a lot more accessible beyond just the PDF that it puts out. I think it'll make it much more easy for people to consume. That's something that we pride ourselves on. I know, of course, as government, there are certain boundaries that they have to set, but in this era of, and 2023 is global stock take, so it's a very important year for India to, of course, showcase also that it does meet these, I guess, the superior thresholds of, transparency requirements that will be that we have to, ever since the Paris Accord came into force in 2020. And this platform really helps us do it. So please do go out there and share the links associated with the data that we publish more widely. We would love to clarify any doubts that you guys might have on the data itself and help improve it. I mean, at the end of the day, this is not a static portal. We are definitely open to making this, more dynamic and taking in suggestions from anyone who might have a different view on the emissions. An interesting feature of it, of course, is the subsector and state level numbers. And I think if we can sort of try and get this consistent with the way the different states think about it, it'll be really useful for Government of India as well. So I'll stop with that. And maybe Nikhil, if you want to.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik. Yeah, very warm welcome to all of you, and really thank you for taking out the time, even for the online participants. And thank you, heartfelt regards for Dr. Bhatt to join us, and also Mr. Lokendra Thakkar and Mr. Shweta from MP and Gujarat. I think, like Raman mentioned, I am one of the relics. So when we really started out, the intent was just to sort of wrap our head around the methodology for emission estimation, and what is really used, what data is used. And I think from the start, the intent of the platform was to put out all the data very transparently, with explanations and with supporting methodological notes and spreadsheets and such, all the analysis out there on the platform so that it's easily consumable. And I think we would really, we got a lot of support also from Dr. Bhatt. We engaged in discussions and sort of also got inputs and guidance. So it's been a long journey. Really, this is the fourth phase, and over time, our estimates and our understanding of the sort of the methodology, the data sets, that has also improved. What we do have now across the sectors also speaks, more closely to what is happening on the ground, and I think that is also important because it can drive sort of policy making, decision making, and also inform the community and various organizations and decision makers. I think, yeah, I'll just keep it short. And again, thank you for joining us. What do you have?
Very good morning to everyone. And unlike Nikhil and Karthik who are here, I mean, this is my first time with the GHGPI platform. I've always been on the other side, which means, being part of the national communications, the BUR, doing the land use sector inventory. So being part of those intense discussions that we've had through all those processes. And then now on the other side, I was also privy to the work that happens here because my team is involved in the energy sector modeling at CSTEP right from the phase one. So it kind of gives me a lot of insights into the way things are done out here. So my understanding and my take on this would be, yes, as Karthik rightly pointed out, an independent inventory, which kind of aligns itself with the national inventory and then talks about, how it is at a sectoral level, much more granular details is something that, kind of adds value, makes things transparent at the end of the day. But more importantly, I would also think that, because as CSTEP, we've involved with certain states in developing the state action plans on climate change. And what we realize is that more and more people, states are still at an advanced stage, but then a lot of them are still developing it. Now, here is a data platform which is readily available, which can build on that, because the mitigation strategies cannot happen without the basic inventory. So now, given that, here is a platform which offers that, so there is a opportunity for states to build on that and come up with strategies which are aligned with obviously the national goals and targets and the SDGs ultimately. So that kind of opens up a lot of data for the states to actually consume. And also, interestingly, India is also talking about domestic carbon markets in the recent times. So obviously, we know, for markets to perform, you need a baseline, you need to have targets. So which means to say, this becomes an essential part to look at if that becomes a reality. I'm not saying this is the only way to look at it. The national communications, the BURs are there, but then the minute you get down to sectoral level or even regional levels, maybe, we don't know how it's going to pan out. So there is an opportunity for actually utilizing this information to do those as well. One more thing, of course, that kind of stands out, particularly, I can talk about the energy sector that our team at CSTEP has been working on, is that some of the subsectors, maybe if you look at it from the overall energy budget, they may be very small, but there are data gaps. So I think, it gives us clues as to where there is a need to kind of build on information, to kind of build a much more robust inventory at the national level, maybe at a subnational level moving forward. But we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. So this is all I had to share with the group. Thank you.
So, you may have noticed that Mr. Ajay Raghava has also joined us. And, we'd like to thank him for coming in, and happy to have you here. Just to introduce you all again, I think Ajay Raghava doesn't need an introduction, but to just introduce him. He is the Deputy Director in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. He's of course an internationally known climate expert and is a member of the NatCom cell and part of the team that is responsible for submission of India's national communications and biennial update reports to UNFCCC. He also represents Government of India at the UNFCCC on climate change, especially on Kyoto Protocol compliance and enhanced transparency framework negotiations. So welcome, Ajay. Good to have you on board. I would now invite Dr. Bhatt and or Ajay to sort of, give their keynote, and then we will, take it from there.
I think Ajay should speak first, because he always complains that when I am in the audience, he doesn't get a chance to speak. So over to him.
I think he's just pulling my legs. So I think I would rather speak now. First of all, good morning to all, and I was in a meeting in the morning since 9, so apologies for coming slightly late. Regards to all the panel members and distinguished participants, especially those who have traveled from states and people from media. I think this is a very important discussion which we are having today and need of the hour. There have been a lot of interest in various states to have their own inventories. We are preparing the national inventory for last almost 25 years and have so far submitted 5 inventories to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, this is based on the guidelines which have been accepted by all the countries in terms of the IPCC guidelines. And the IPCC guidelines, current guidelines, is the 2006 guidelines. We also have now the refinement of 2019, but that guidelines are for the national inventory. So when we are having the subnational on state inventory, so we also need to have our own guidelines for that. We can adopt some of the features which are there for the national inventory, but you need to tweak it. You need to also customize it in terms of how it will be applicable to the states. One example is, for example, the transport emissions which we are having. Right now, if there are civil aviation emissions within the country, then you allocate to the country, and then if they are international, it goes to the bunkers. So how you are going to adjust that, for example, for the states? So this is just one example. There could be many other things. So there is a need of our that we develop our own guidelines for the state inventories. And this will be very helpful, not only for the center, but also the states, because they will know. Secondly, I think the education of people in the states in terms of inventory preparation is also important. We don't have so many experts which are available, which can guide so many different inventories. And inventory cannot be a one-time work. It has to be a continuous work. So it will require a lot of skills, a lot of manpower, and a lot of data. So the states, not only the state governments have to provide the data regularly in a particular format, which can be the activity data for the state inventories, but also have dedicated experts who have understanding of the subject and who can do it. And this GHG platform is, I think, a welcome step in that direction, that it is meeting those shortcomings which we have right now. And this is increasingly needed, the state level initiatives, because you know that the present government is also monitoring around 40 indices nationally. And these indices, whether it is Environmental Protection Act, environmental performance indices, or the climate change performance index, or it is climate risk index, and so many different indices. We have also been asked to rank the states in terms of performance and what are the reform action plans which states can implement. So with the lack of data at the state level, it is very difficult to judge and drive that reform action plan. So the information which will be used will not only be used for the mitigation and adaptation, but also have a healthy competition within the states and identify those areas of improvement which is needed at this stage. And that will help us not only in terms of ease of doing business, but ease of living, and also give directions to the national agenda of mitigation, adaptation, and also increasingly now in terms of the long-term strategy, which we are going to pronounce very soon. We also have the updated NDCs, which we have recently submitted to the UNFCCC last month. And it's a quite ambitious targets in terms of non-fossil as well as emission intensity reduction. And we already had a very ambitious goal for the carbon sinks. These needs to be apportioned not only within the sectors, but also the different states, so that they can equally participate in meeting those national targets. So I think a lot of things have already been discussed on this issue. So I would like to end here and say that again, reiterate that there is a requirement for having a sort of a guideline which can steer our work and advise states how to proceed on a regular basis. So GHG platform is good, but I think capabilities of states also needs to be developed. So I once again thank the organizers for calling me on this important subject. Thank you.
Dr. Bhatt.
Good morning, everybody. My fellow panelists on the dais and distinguished friends and colleagues in the audience. At the outset, let me very profusely thank the five institutions who are making this consortium. The CEW, the CMIT, the C-STEP, ICLAI, and Vasudha Foundation. And while I convey my grateful thanks, let me also say that we attach a lot of importance, we in the government, to this platform. And that is how you would have seen that the results of this platform are also reflected in the latest BURs, biennial update reports. And it is, that the great efforts that you do and the efforts that a group of scientists who are asked by the government to prepare the inventory, they do. Your work is largely complementary. One supports the other. I also recognize very distinguished delegates in the audience. And let me begin with our fellow colleague from the media side. She just looked and then again started doing her work. Urmi, welcome to our meeting. We have Mr. Lokendra Thakkar. Welcome, sir. We also have Mr. Subramaniam. Welcome, sir. And online, there are a lot of people. And we have also with us Dr. Niveta Jain from IARI, who has been championing the inventory in the agriculture sector, to which I'll come in a while. And Mr. Shweta. Welcome, sir. And of course, I wish I knew the name of each and every one of you. I should have taken your names and conveyed my grateful thanks to you personally. Take it as said. I also recognize that we have a lot of people online, around more than 60 of them, and even more. So most welcome those who have joined virtually in these difficult COVID pandemic times. I recognize who have joined virtually. Dr. Ulka Kelkar. Dr. Ulka, are you able to hear us?
Very much so, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for confirming that you are able to. Voice is reaching you. So, what do I have to bring to you people who are deeply involved in the research from? Let me say very quickly. So, let us also have a background. The world is going through multiple crises, rising energy bills, problems of supply, and a pandemic that continues to challenge us, push back years of progress. And alongside these ongoing crises are the intensifying threats of climate change, biodiversity loss, land and ocean pollution, and so on. Environmental stresses, they impose additional burdens on the poor and the vulnerable in the world who bear really bear very little responsibility for these threats while they await the fulfillment of their development aspirations. In this backdrop, where do we place climate change? I think climate change is the epitome of all other environmental challenges. It is the prime concern. Even if the world fixes all other problems of pollution, biodiversity loss, ozone hole, this, that, and if this problem is not fixed, then there would be, under a changing climate regime, the problems will still remain. And it will impact all sectors of the economy. So any other thing fixed, but this not fixed, it will not carry lasting value. In this, with this remark, let me say one or two words about climate change and climate policy itself. India firmly believes in multilateralism, and our climate policy is informed by our vision of inclusive growth, eradication of poverty, climate-friendly lifestyles, and firm adherence to the UNFCCC foundational principles of equity and climate justice. And India has been a champion of adequate development space for developing countries. And in this context of climate change, this means access to carbon space. In the last 10 years, we have been increasingly championing the idea of global carbon budget, which needs to be equitably shared among all countries. And I must add here that the report card is now out. The IPCC in 2021 and 22. So it's first report, one report came in 2021 last year, and the other two reports this year. And this report card is now out. It says who is contributing how much to climate change. And if you read the report, even the summary for policy makers, which is kind of an executive summary of the large 5,000, 4,000 plus pages report, then the AR6, IPCC is in the sixth assessment cycle. The report says that between 1850 to 2019, IPCC does not take names of countries. So it says that between 1850 to 2019, the cumulative emissions from entire South Asia, India included, is just 4% of the total. Just 4%. And all this has entered the world data set through the arduous efforts of people like you who prepare inventory. And these inventories then find their way after appropriate peer review to the world databases. So this is the context that, and if we talk about ourselves, then it is 1/6 of humanity. And even if the whole of South Asia is ascribed to us, even then it is just 4%. Having said that, I have to also say that the all said and done, the forest and tree cover as well as mangrove cover in the country are registering an increase. Forests are teeming with wildlife and in terms of agricultural emissions, we have talked with the Gen Z level. But let's say we face a mistake. Is a very important one from the policy point of view. India was told that you join the international global methane pledge. Now, these are, subtle feelings, I would call them, diversionary tactics of developed world who bring in every time one new agenda. So, methane pledge. Now, if you see what is the contribution of methane from India? So, as I said, we are not part of this. Our contribution is absolutely minimal. I said it is 4% population. Now, you see the backdrop for methane. What are the sources of methane? So, obviously, we have the largest cattle population in the world. We are a great rice producer. So we are the second largest rice exporter. So we not only produce it for ourselves, but we also feed the world. And our farmers are small farmers who toil hard, and make the nation self-sufficient. And also, the surplus is given to the world in the normal market. But with this backdrop of small margin farmers contributing on this and with the highest cattle population, how much is the impact? So, if what is the total emissions that we have? It is about 2.5 billion. Of the 2.5 billion tons, our total GHG emissions, I am saying, at the 2016 base year, how much is the agricultural emissions? About 14%. So Niveta says yes, 14%. So if you see the, again, at the yardstick of that 4%, if it is 2.5 billion, that 4%, 14% of this is 14% is agricultural emissions, sorry. And then it also includes N2O, CO2. So you can imagine the minuscule amount of methane that is produced after having the largest cattle population and after being the second largest rice export. Very, very. So, you know, your inventory work only can then that what is right and what is wrong. If we were not doing inventory to field measurements, again, somebody would say your methane emissions must be very high because you have highest cattle population. But then it is science which should drive such debates. It is the inventory measurements which are very important nationally from policy research point of view. And it is for this kind of research that will come very handy if we have to have a solid argument. There is another thing which is now coming up, as though that global methane pledge, which we did not join, was not enough. There is something called global methane pledge energy pathways. Yet another thing to distract. Why I call them subterfuges or diversionary efforts of the developed world? Because, you know, which is the principal greenhouse gas? Who has put the world in a jeopardy? We know the developed world was more fortunate to develop early. And rather than concentrating on how to reduce domestically, all sorts of advisories are given that now you join a methane pledge. If you have to reduce methane, please do it domestically. That is what our answer should be to them. And global methane, you know, there is a lot that is methane in terms of leakage, flaring, venting in these developed countries. Ours is very minimal. And our oil companies are, you know, making every effort to use whatever can be used. So we don't have that kind of a problem. But developed world has a real difficulty because there are a lot of leakages in the system. And both from technical and non-technical flaring and venting, they have difficulties. We don't suffer from that kind of. But in terms of whether we are with the world in terms of research and innovation, techniques for analyzing methane, yes, we are a part of that discussion. And Coal Ministry is doing that. And we are part of the world efforts in finding newer and better ways for minimizing the methane. And we also have a number of initiatives by which we are already trying to reduce the methane emissions, and you will learn more about them. You already know about them, all of you, but maybe when Dr. Niveta Jain is taking the floor, she can say about the procedures in rice cultivation and so, where this has been minimized and those values are there for us and the world to see. I want to also say one more point, that we should always be basing our faith on science. The rigor of science is something what we should do. And this has been the confidence in the whole science and the scientists have been reposed by the people of India. They are here in respected time, respect. Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, Jai Vigyan. And then Jai Kisan. And why these things? We very difficult that we believe in the work that scientists use. And we should celebrate their work. Their research. And last point in terms of honesty. Lot of long-term right? And that long term. Healthcare lot in Madhumala. Has been monitored for. And across rainfall gradient. Other similar model plants. We plan. We have to out. Research has been not been appreciated, not maybe we would be able to embody those hardcore scientific results for a long, from a long term perspective. And so they will tell a lot about carbon balance and the in the same way, we have areas like mangroves where we have still not fathomed much. It's a challenge for the researchers because mangroves may sequester many more times carbon than the forest. There are numbers that is 5 times more than but it says 10 times more than it. Even there are reports that it is 50 times. So, but it requires good investigation. But one point is very clear now that mangroves have much more sequestration potential than. So once again, congratulations each and every one of you for doing very good work. And all the work that you have done of this time is from 2018 up to 2018. And of course, update to be more and more update. So maybe when then it would be very for our next report in terms of government. Of course, what is the work that would be very nice if we can. And we are and what has been the work of the general all of you in terms of the ground level has also been validated. There's been sorting, drone and satellite data. I had has done. And it has also so these are the checks that gives me the rigor that tell us how to take it further. The point about the granularity of data that that kind of very granular data. Because now we go by those IPCC guidelines, 2006. But soon in the EPR deputy forms 2024, 2024, more and more granularity will be required, and that will be available. All data that is because all this data is any case are within the effective process. There is, there was a time no process by which the communication concept, but there is a process with the user. I scientists have developed and tried then they have so this group this the is number of questions. Then there is one. And then further decide that specific in the you are very happy. Somebody is being that they yeah has been commented more than one time. So all that again are because of the intent, because continue doing that sort of thing. Continue giving your best. Thank you very much, one and all. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. On the 2019 numbers, we did try to sort of get a process going amongst us to sort of give you the numbers quickly. But we'll reconvene again and regroup. And I think the absolute numbers are already there. I think, have shared those with you, but we could go up to 2020 and see how quickly we can do that. So we'll have a consultation amongst ourselves on that. So we are running a little late. And I was wondering, there was supposed to be a 15-minute tea break. I was wondering if we do a 5-minute break, everybody pick up their cups, come back to their tables and chairs, and then we can, start off with the presentations by the partners on the numbers. And then Shwetal has to leave a little early, so we'll convene that panel of expert sort of feedback. And Shwetal could do his feedback at that point and leave us so that he can, keep to his schedule. Well, that was the default request, sir, but it wasn't entertained. So maybe he'll listen to you more than he listens to me. So if that's all right with everybody, do we take a quick 5-minute tea break just to pick up your cups, bring them back to your table, and we start off with the presentations on the results. We can do a rolling thing, but I think a lot of people want tea immediately. So I thought give them 5 minutes to pick up that cup and settle down, and then we can get on with the presentations, if that's all right. There's also one thing I wanted to say, Dr. Bhatt, that apart from all this, one of the functions, I suppose, that a group like ours could perform, and this is what we, when we had our inaugural meeting of, declaring our results and launching our numbers, was that eventually we want it to be a situation where people on the streets understand GDP, understand GHG emissions the way they understand GDP, and they relate to, the macro GDP and macro GHG from their individual actions. And that's something that we all should, I think, also be striving for. So that was one of our vision sort of statements that we started with. I don't think we've reached there, but yeah, we're at least reaching the states, and people like you are interested in, working with these numbers. So that's a great.
Raman, if you permit, sorry,
Yeah.
come back again. There is a lot that we think we can contribute, because at every stage, there is some controversy or the other. So I talked about methane. There is also something called nitric acid coalition, where the world is now saying that let us all together reduce N2O. And it is in that context, the neem coated urea that we have in our country comes very handy. But that kind of research, unless you people apply yourselves to all these controversies which are doing rounds, this is championed nitric acid coil, and these are championed. Their strategy is very clear. Nitric acid coalition, gas is championed mainly by Germany, I think. They feel that we should take this forward. The methane, of course, is championed by the US. So a group of countries, they because only through your contract that you can take the full practice. You can define.
So as planned, we break for tea, but it's just a 5-minute break to allow you guys to pick up your cups of tea or coffee, come back to your seats. And we then start off with our presentations, if that's okay. Thanks very much. Shivika Brini, yeah? So if you all could please come to the dais. Hey, you guys can all sit there and from there come here and do your presentation. So, yeah. Please have a seat. So I think Rini, you'll go first, right? And then we follow the order of energy, IPPU, FLU, waste.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Raman sir. Thank you, everyone who is present here and people who have joined us online. I hope we are audible to people who have joined us on Zoom. Please let us know if that's not happening.
If you speak in the mic, you'll be audible. If you don't speak in the mic, you will not be audible. That's
Rahul, do confirm with us if we are audible or not. Thanks. And thank you for taking a very short tea break. So that's very helpful. So we'll quickly talk about our sector, sector analysis. And the first thing that we'll start with is the economy-wide emissions, and we'll give an overview of the website of the GHG Platform India website. So I'll take you to our platform website, which has been recently revamped and uploaded with the latest numbers. Oh, is it not visible? Okay. Yeah, the screen is shared. Yeah. No, I think now it should be visible. Okay. All right. So I'll also request my colleague Rahul to put the URL of this website on the chat box here for our online, participants. So this is the GHG Platform India website. This is the homepage. What we have on the homepage is these infographics for the economy wide and all the sectors. The scrolling banner is there. So on each of these infographics, we have the net emissions, the share in net and gross emissions, a basic trend, a share of gases, contribution of gases. And for each of these infographics, you have this small tab, if you can see the emission estimates, where you can click and it will take you to the emissions page from where you can download the Excel sheet. You can also download this particular infographic from this, download button here, and you can directly use it in your presentations, reports, whatever, wherever you want to use. Scrolling further, we have the tabs for taking us to the methodology pages. I'll quickly go to that. Then we have another infographic about emissions intensity of GDP. And our estimates of GHGPI say that our emissions intensity has reduced by 22% with respect to 2005 levels. And we have another 23% to go for our updated NDC target, which is 45% with respect to 2005. At the end of this page, we have our latest publication. So we have the trend analysis. All of you must have seen, we have kept those prints out, the prints outside. We have the briefing papers from all our partners here. And then we also have the state trend analysis. I'll quickly take you to the emission estimates page. Here you have the sector-wise pages. We'll just see the economy-wide. We have this beautiful sunburst chart here, which gives you the absolute numbers and also the percentage contribution of each sector, subsector, and the category. to the tier which is right inside to that to that subsector or category. And you can click, so it will give you of that particular subsector. You can go back to economy wide. The important thing here is that you can, if you click here, you'll get an Excel sheet. So this is economy wide. Of course, in economy wide, you will not have any formulas or methodology or, what is the equation used. But when you go to sector pages, you have the crystal clear, the Excel sheets, which guides you how we have arrived on these emission numbers for India and also for the states. Here is the methodology tab. Let me just take you to, for example, to AFLU sector tab. So we have the most updated methodology note here, which you can download. And this is an addendum to our previous methodology detailed reports that were done in the previous phases, which you will find in the resources tab. I'll take you there in a minute. So in the resources, we have library, where you have the emission estimates of all the previous phases. You have the publications. So in publications, of course, we have the latest phase tab page added to it, and you also have briefing papers and other publications of the previous phases, and then you have the methodology notes of the previous phases here. So I'll go to phase 4 publications. So in addition to the briefing papers that our partners have given, you will find, and you can easily download here, we do have the trend analysis documents. And in the states, so first is of course that of India, which is just one document. Here you can click the state you want to download. So for example, if we click Bihar, the PDF will automatically open and you can access that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the analytics page that we have. Again, in analytics, we have analytics for all the sectors. I'll go to the app. I'll first show the economy wide. So here you have, gas wise emissions. The default selection is CO2 equivalent, which has been computed using global warming potential of AR2, because that's what the government of India is using for all our official communication. But we also have for AR6, we have for GTP, both AR2 and AR6. And then you can go to the states filter and you can select whichever state, or that if you want to see the India. In economy wide, we don't have advanced filters because it's not needed. But if you go to any sector page, you can also go to advanced filters, and you can just filter down to whatever specific emission data you need. So that's that about the website. Do let us know if if you get stuck somewhere. Please feel free to reach out to us. Am I back to the PPT? No. So I'll have to stop sharing and then reshare. Yeah, so that was about our website. Going further. So this is what the trend of economy-wide emissions of India look like. So overall, the emissions have increased by 86% between 2005 and 18. And they have seen a growth rate of 4.90 compounded growth rate between these 2 years, in this time frame. Of course, energy was the highest contributor. This was followed by the industrial processes and product use. And then we have the AFLU sector. When comparing it with the official inventories, our numbers are, the difference is only 5% when we talk about net emissions. And in case of gross emissions, it's only 2.69%. This is what the sectoral share looks. So we have a comparison for 5 and 18. You can see how energy sectors, share has increased from 72% to 83% between the 2 years. The only other sector for which the share has increased is the IPPU, whereas that for AFLU sector and the waste sector, the share has in fact decreased. This is about the share of gases. Of course, CO2 is the major contributing gas. This is followed by methane, which contributes around 16% of the economy-wide emissions in terms of CO2 equivalent, and then nitrous oxide. The 2 major contributing sectors for CO2 is energy and IPPU. For methane, it is AFLU and waste, and even for nitrous oxide, it is AFLU and waste. This is what the per capita emissions of India look like. So they have increased by around 45% almost, between 5 and 18. And right now we are at around 2.24 tons of CO2 per capita. The next chart on the right is about the GHG emissions intensity. As I had shown you on the website, our calculation shows that India's GHG intensity, emissions intensity has reduced by 22%. And right now we are around 21.42 kilograms of CO2 per thousand Indian rupees. This is the last slide for the economy wide. Here, what we'd like to highlight, this is of course not our work, we have taken from Carbon Briefs, that although our numbers look very huge, as you had seen in the first slide, we are around almost 2,900 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions in 2018. But the important thing to note is our historical footprint has been so small, whether we talk about the absolute numbers, cumulative absolute numbers, or we talk about the cumulative per capita. In both these things, you can see India is far below so many countries, and especially when we talk about per capita. So I'd like to end here, and now I'd like to invite my colleague Roshna from C-STEP to talk about the energy sector.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So in this presentation, I will give you a brief on the energy sector emissions. So now if you look at the energy sector breakup, mainly it can be divided into two parts. One is the emissions due to the fossil fuel combustion, and the other part is the fuel production, like the mining part, the processing, and the crude oil processing. So coming to the fuel combustion part, the key sectors are the electricity generation, transport, and other sectors includes residential, commercial, and agriculture energy use, and the fishery sector. As Bhatt mentioned, we are also following the IPCC 2006 methodology. So the key part is the fuel consumption, and the other one is the emission factor. And wherever possible, we have used the country-specific emission factors. And in case the data of the emission factor is not available, we have used the IPCC methodology-based emission factors. So going forward, this is the basic equation we followed for the energy sector emission calculation. So it's a very simple equation, which is a sum of the activity data, which is basically the fuel consumption data multiplied with the emission factor. So for example, for the CO2 emissions, it will be the fuel consumption for a particular activity, and then a conversion factor or the unit consistency multiplied with the emission factor. And coming to the data sources, we have used the ministry reports. And in case the data is not available, we have filed the RTIs. And in all these things, we had experience from data gaps. So in that case, we have contacted the experts, sectoral experts, to get opinions and made some informed assumptions. So going forward, this is the results or the trends of emissions from the energy sector. So the energy sector emissions grown from 806 million tons of CO2 equivalent to 1613 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is a CAGR of 5.5%. And the key contributor is the public electricity generation, contributing around 68%. And this is followed by the transport sector. In fact, the transport sector had seen a higher growth compared to the sectoral growth of around 7.6%. And this is mainly due to the significant increase in the vehicle numbers during this period. And coming to the other sectors, the main factor or the main component for the GHG emission is the shift towards the LPG demand in the cooking sector, which had doubled during this period. And for the fugitive emissions, which is the fuel emissions during the fuel production, had seen a marginal increase during this period. So now if we just zoom into the share of fossil fuels in the emissions, the major contributor is the solid fuel, which is the coal. And it had almost doubled during this period. And similar is the case with the liquid fuels like diesel and petrol, which had also doubled during this period. And gaseous fuel, there is marginal increase compared to the solid and liquid fuels. So now if you look at the share, actually the share for the solid fuel had increased in the emissions, even if it's a 1%. So we are seeing a higher share of coal in our energy mix. So now if we just more zoom in to the sectoral analysis, in the case of public electricity generation, 93% was the share of solid fuels in the emission contribution in 2005, and this increased to 98%. And the major reason is the increased coal-based electricity generation, and our natural gas plant were not operating at a higher plant load factor, which was operating at a very low. And the diesel plant and naphtha plant were either not operating or were shut down during this period. In case of the transport and other sectors, we had seen a transition towards a lower carbon intensive fuels, or the to transition to the cleaner fuels like natural gas, LPG. And you can see that there is a share of the gaseous fuel in the transport sector had increased. And for the other sectors, you can see the share of the solid fuels decreased from 35% to 24% during this period. So this shows that we had shifted mostly from the fuel wood, coal and coke towards LPG. And there's a slight increase in the share of fuel production from solid fuels, mainly due to the increase in coal production during this period. So this is the last slide from my side. So this shows the comparison of the sector, the energy sector, with the official estimates. So for most of this years, the numbers are mostly in range, or the deviation is very marginal. And the sectoral deviation, the maximum deviation is around 12%, which we have seen in 2016. And the deviation is mainly due to the data gaps, which we had observed mainly in the other sectors, like the cooking sector, the diesel consumption or the coke consumption in the other sectors. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Thank you.
So I'll keep this relatively short. So actually, even though it says IPPU, it's a vestige of the way the platform was set up, where all industrial emissions was actually sort of carried out by estimates were carried out by CEW. CSTIP colleagues, Roshna, what she presented was energy emissions from everything else but industry. So industrial energy and IPPU are actually covered here. I'd like to place on record thanks to my colleagues Ganesh, Dilip, and Rishabh Patidar, who helped put together some of these estimates. I'm presenting on their behalf. So, I jump straight to the results here, but methodology-wise, I think Roshan has already covered that in her slides. There's no rocket science to energy use emissions estimates. So it's practically it's basically the activity, which is fuel use multiplied by the emissions factor. That's really what constitutes energy use emissions. On IPPU, the methodology is a little more complicated, but again, the IPCC sets out clear defaults for what should be the emissions associated with various industrial processes. The one that we're all obviously very familiar with, for instance, is cement calcination, which, as you know, is one of the tougher ones to sort of mitigate, arises from the calcination of calcium carbonate, and which forms lime. Similarly, for other industries, for instance, in alumina, you've got pot liners, which basically are made of various materials that basically degrade as part of the process, not necessarily because of combustion. So that's really where it comes in. And there's again factors based on how much you're producing. So for every ton of product produced, there is an estimation saying that, okay, these many tons worth of CO2 would have been released for a specific technology type. Again, here in the case of India, the details of what the specific technology is being applied in various industrial units is not available. As a result, many of these actually go with global defaults. Even though the estimates of the GHG platform are all bottom up, they are still sort of aggregate and not facility detailed level. So the source of information for all of the emissions estimates here are the annual survey of industry, which comes with a lag of about 2 years. It provides you reasonably good estimates of energy use by way of amount of money spent and the rates at which they buy them, from which you estimate the quantity, and that quantity then gets converted to emissions estimates through emissions factors that Roshna talked about. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing here that the fuel use emissions basically contribute about 75% of overall industrial sector emissions, which is large, but it also says that even if we were to decarbonize industrial fuel use, we are still left with 25% of emissions, which are part of processes. So this is perhaps the most significant finding of industrial emissions, which is that it will require us to think radically differently about how to decarbonize it, because that's still, even in the context of India, leaves about 200 million tons to be abated from, technologies that we don't have yet. Cement, of course, is the biggest in that. And there's been the growth rate itself, as you can imagine, is about 7%, which is higher than the numbers that, I think Rini quoted at the economy level, obviously, because, industry is what is obviously the backbone of the economy. So, even India, as you know, has been a services-led economy for the good part of the last 2 decades. But industry emissions have, of course, grown at a slightly higher pace than the rest of the economy itself. And metals, which is again the core of infrastructure, is the largest contributor there as well. You can see in that pie, and of course in the website that we indicated, you'll be able to find more of the details. On emissions intensity, I didn't want to put this in here, but again, I think this is the one that maybe we can relate to a little bit more. It's not a secular decline, as you can see. It does go up and down primarily based on how much it produces in a particular year, what sector is sort of outperforming the other. There is, of course, an interesting facet that I'll say. The first phase of the PAT scheme, as you can see, between 2012 to 15, shows a very nice clear decline. There is not that clear decline after. I mean, not sure what exactly to attribute it to. We've done a detailed assessment of PAT 1 and how it performed in a separate paper. It'll be good to see what actually happened after PAT 1. Was it that standards kind of flattened out, and as a result, with increasing production, something else happened? Yeah, remains to be seen. But the overall decline in emissions intensity has not been as high as through the rest of the economy in the industrial sector. I'd also like to point out that small and medium industry is actually not included here in the emissions, primarily because what they consume is mostly electricity. Actually, it's less of solid and liquid fuels. I mean, it's a fraction really of what large industry does. So what you see as industry here is largely only large and medium. So small and micro, I'm sorry, would not be accounted here, but they mostly consume electricity, which anyway is accounted for in the utility scale electricity generation that Roshna presented. So from industrial energy use, as you can see, it's a nice little pipe organ there. Sectors that stand out are iron and steel, which will continue to grow, as well as cement. I mean, again, here, of course, we talk about it as non-metallic minerals, but the largest portion of that, of course, is cement. Iron and steel, primarily by way of coke use, stands out there again, and non-ferrous metals, aluminum stands out there. And if you look at the share of emissions coming from solid fuels, again, goes back to the point that Roshna made in her presentation. We're still very much a coal-dependent economy for energy use, and as a result, coal dominates in that share. Similarly, for IPPU, I mean, not similarly actually, cement production here overtakes iron and steel or aluminum for process use emissions because of the large footprint associated with the process use emission itself. The factor, nearly about, I would say half of the emissions pretty much comes from calcination as compared to fuel use, and any amount of substitution that you have of clinker with other products is not going to take that away. That needs to be kept in mind. This has grown at a pretty healthy rate, and and finally, process use from emissions are driven by metal industry as well as iron and steel, chemical, of which Gujarat is a very big manufacturer. In fact, Gujarat has a fairly high footprint when it comes to emissions from chemical industry. And final slide, I mean, as I said, we have a big push for make in India. We want to make different things. It's not the usual brick and mortar, cement, steel. We want to make new things like solar panels, batteries, the emissions footprints of all of which are actually higher. So you can expect the emissions footprint of the industry sector to go up. But even within this, there's a portion that we can't decarbonize, and that needs to be addressed by way of looking at technologies that will be suitable in the Indian context. And India needs to invest in the R&D to actually capture that. Otherwise, CCUS, of course, is the go-to technology. Let's see where it takes. Open to questions after.
Hi, good morning all. I'm Shivika from Vasudha, and I'll be presenting what our team is worked hard on for the apple sector. Just to give an overview, what the apple sector is divided into the subsectors of aggregate sources, land and livestock.
And for all of these sectors, we have used the IPCC methodology, 2006 guidelines. And majority of our estimates, we were fortunate to be able to obtain country-specific emission factors. Majority of them are tier 2. We have also, gone ahead estimate as the methodology demands, estimated carbon dioxide emissions, which are coming, emissions or removals, which are coming majorly from the land subsector. And from the aggregate sources in livestock, the emissions are methane and nitrous oxide majorly. Looking at the entire trend from 2005 to 2018, the orange line is the aggregate, gross emissions. And the green one is the net emission. And what we see here is, overall, when just looking at the net emissions, there has been a decline of 33%. And when we look at the gross emissions, they seem to be, kind of consistent. So that is, the clear indicator of what the, future of this sector is going to be. Coming back to, the net emissions, we can see that the decline, therefore, is majorly due to the increase in removals from the land subsector. So overall, during this entire period, the land subsector is kind of removing like 31% of the gross emissions. Taking a detailed look at the land subsector, we, studying the data from NRSC that we obtained, as well as the state of forest reports. It's pretty clear here that the major contributor here is the forest land category. And basically the removals in the land subsector have doubled because of a massive increase in removals from forest land, because the area has increased in the past few years. And moving on to the gross APLU emissions, like we saw in the trend that it is remaining nearly consistent. There's a very small increase, which comparing 2005 and 2018, we can see can be attributed majorly to increase in emissions from rice cultivation. And finally, just comparing a gas-wise analysis from the sector, APLU sector as a whole, all of these gases we are comparing in CO2 equivalents. We can see that methane emissions form, a bulk of the emissions from the sector. And CO2 removals are also, have picked up from the due to the forest land category here. Yeah, that's all from the sector. There are more details which we can get into personally. We can. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nikhil Kulse Patil. I am from ICLI. We are basically a local government association. We work on energy, climate change, and urban sustainability. So I'll be presenting on the waste sector estimates and some of the analysis and insights from this phase. So in terms of the waste sector, we essentially included emissions related to disposal of municipal solid waste from domestic wastewater in urban and rural areas, and also from industrial wastewater, industrial effluent from industries which generate a lot of organic effluent. For the waste sector, primarily, we had emissions from, we have emissions typically CH4 and N2 emissions, which are there. Like all the other sectors and partners, we followed the IPCC guidelines and also sort of aligned with India's national inventory reports and processes. So overall at the sectoral level, the emissions over this time period of from 2005 to 18, broadly, they have increased steadily at a CAGR of 2%. You can see that the main contributor is domestic wastewater in urban and rural areas, contributing to over half of the emissions, and then industrial wastewater contributes to 1/3 of the emissions. and the disposal of solid waste in urban areas, it's around 11.6%. CH4 is the primary gas, which leads to, which in terms of emission contribution in the waste sector. There is a slight dip you can see in 2015 in terms of the emissions. So this primarily is driven by reductions in emissions from the pulp and the paper sector in terms of industrial wastewater because of improvements in technology and data also reflected that there's less effluent generation, thereby less emissions from this sector. Coming now, I'll just take you through each subsector and some insights. So coming to municipal solid waste, so this sort of had the highest CAGR growth of all the three sectors. In terms of the contribution of states, I think 5 states contributed to around half of the emissions from the sector. So again, it's important that these states and also this is sort of a result of the size of these states also, because a lot of the emissions are driven by the population size, how much you generate and so on. So that is a key sort of driving factor here. But I think mostly there have been a number of initiatives under large programs like the SPM2. There's a lot of infrastructure that's put in. In 2015, around only 15% of solid waste was processed. Now that figure is up to 50% or so. I think, but what needs to be prioritized is, that different fractions of waste are sort of processed through appropriate route and technology. And we do have a lot of infrastructure that is on ground, but it sort of needs to be operated optimally at the optimum capacity and so on. Other systems need to be in place so that we sort of ensure that we can abate the emissions as a generation of solid waste goes up. In terms of domestic wastewater, so this is the largest contributor, and most of the emissions, or say a large part of the emissions, 60% or so, was from rural areas. But this is again a function of the rural population being higher. But in terms of the growth in emissions, the urban areas or urban domestic wastewater related emissions registered a higher growth. In terms of some interesting insights from the state, so from the top 5 states, if we sort of place the utilization or the use of a particular treatment type versus how much emissions are there, we saw that there's in terms of coverage, there's still a gap in terms of sewer network and treatment. So there's a lot of dependency on on-site sanitation systems such as septic tanks, which are used by a large part of households or a portion of households, and also then they contribute significantly to emissions because their methane generation potential is higher. Similarly, same is the case with public latrines as well. And what we also found is there's a significant contribution of untreated wastewater. So where there is sewer network, but then eventually that wastewater does not really flow into a sewage treatment plant and get treated. In terms of emission contribution, it is lower, but then again, as infrastructure is sort of built, it's important that your network and your treatment capacity goes in sync, and those connections are made as well. Another key contributor was, of course, states do have significant treatment capacity. There is aerobic treatment, which is prevalent in wastewater. So, from the aerobic STPs, that was again a significant contributor. We also did a briefing paper to just analyze, sort of modeling that what is the emission reduction potential in states. When you look at wastewater treatment specifically, if you look at anaerobic versus aerobic treatment, because in anaerobic treatment, you can, it gives you an opportunity to sort of tap the methane which is generated and you can use it for energy generation.
So we did this we did this for 5 states, but in presenting it, we did some detailed analysis for 2 states, which sort of represent the spectrum. So West Bengal is, representative of a state which has still lower network coverage and treatment capacity around 13% or so. And what we saw is, we did 3 scenarios where we gradually increased the percentage of anaerobic treatment from 25% in scenario 1, 50% in scenario 2 to 75% in scenario 3. So as you go on increasing your anaerobic treatment and you do methane capture, as you see when you're going towards scenario 3, really deep emission cut is possible, or emission abatement is possible. So I think a key sort of inference is that states which have low coverage and infrastructure, they are going to really go for big scale up, large scale up in the next say 5 to 10 years. And there in these scale up, I think anaerobic treatment with methane recovery should be a key sort of feature, an essential feature. Also, in states like Gujarat, which again have significant, they already have significant degree of coverage. So again, the same strategy can lead to emission reduction. You can see about 40% compared to your baseline in 2025. But there is still a significant portion of emissions which remains. And this is because there's a lot of aerobic treatment-based STPs which are in place. Around 85% are based on aerobic type. So managing these STPs better is again a key strategy, because that will lead to reduction in emissions. Yeah, the last slide on the industrial wastewater. So we considered 11 key sectors with large effluent generation. Primarily, 4 sectors contribute to 96% of the emissions. So it's important that these sectors are sort of targeted again for opportunities, in terms of actually reducing the effluent that's generated, through technological improvements, and also similar to domestic wastewater, targeting anaerobic treatment solutions and with methane recovery as well. Yeah, that is it from my side. Happy to take questions later. Thank you.
So I think, like we already said, Shwetal has to leave early. So what I'll do is I will not do questions right now from the floor. Let Shwetal give his reaction first, and then he can leave. Then we'll call the panel to the dais, and they can give their reactions first. Then we can take questions from the floor and reactions from the floor, if that's all right with everybody. Yeah. Shwetal, so I invite you to the dais. You can give your reaction to our numbers, and then you guys can keep sitting. Yeah. And Shwetal can then leave.
Thank you, Ramanji, and thank you to entire GHG platform. So I was also here in the earlier report when it got published in 2019. So it is always a big learning for me personally and for all the people at the subnational level. And as Dr. Bhatt told in the morning, that this really complements the efforts of the ministry in preparing the biennial update report and the inventory at the national level. And it is really very difficult task to prepare the and calculate the GHG emission, because we have to go through so many calculation methodologies which are very tedious, and data collection is always a challenge. But by the time as we grow, we also get more and more good data. And really I appreciate the efforts of all the partners of this platform, and specifically for making the subnational level report separately, which are very useful for the states to make policies. So when we are announcing the net zero things nationally as well as globally, first, what I think that we simultaneously required to announce, and particularly also from the our international peers or the major emitter countries, that first globally we required to stop the growth rate of the greenhouse gas emission, because since 1990, when we started doing the things under the UNFCCC and then the protocol, it was decided that some countries will stop the growth of their emission and then gradually reduce, but it could not happen from the developed countries. But now India as a country has taken it very seriously, and we are monitoring our growth rate, and we have seen that as compared to 2005, it is almost doubled by the time by 2018 or 2020. So now in next 10 years, we have to reach to the peak, and then to at least de-accelerate the growth of the emission, and our policies are rightly placed, and this analysis really helps us in matching with the policy, because GHG is the first step to start for climate action. And if we see, there are several policies and programs at the national level which gets percolated at the state level, are quite in sync. So one is the renewable energy ambitions, and particularly the state of Gujarat has very good renewable energy potential because of the geographical location of our state. We have the 1600-kilometer long coastline, and we have a huge barren land available for both solar energy and wind energy. So Gujarat is taking lead in renewable energy through policies and programs, and world's largest 30 gigawatt solar wind hybrid plant is upcoming in the Kutch district. And only I was talking to sir today morning that only Kutch district has potential of more than 200 gigawatt. So really energy transition is required for our energy independence, because that is also very important. And if we see the analysis for Gujarat, almost 80% of emission is from the energy sector. So this is very doable, and we know that hard to abate sector will take its own time, and alternate things are required to be introduced into the economy. But if we see the introduction to renewable energy to our economy is very successful after the Gujarat's first solar policy in 2009 megawatt scale, and then we come up with a solar park and so on and so forth, and then the canal top, and now we see the floating solar, and so many more things. And wind and solar complements each other, because generally wind gets generated in the night time, whereas solar is in daytime. So that is a very good thing that is happening. So when we are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, so many things we are now manufacturing. So definitely industrial sector will also contribute a lot, but at the same time, it is very important for sustainable and inclusive growth of our country. We also have very good implementation of Swachh Bharat, and as Nikhilji told, that we also have water treatment, and actually we have the policy of reuse of wastewater, recycled wastewater. So that is really supporting such initiative. Then waste to energy is also one of the key policy of the government of Gujarat. So we are converting municipal solid waste into the energy, so that gives us a dual advantage. So there are several such win-win situation that is creating new economic opportunity, and also to significant progress or tangible progress towards our larger goals or our Panchamrit goals, as our Honorable Prime Minister has told in the COP26. So these are very measurable. So soil organic carbon is also one of the big issue, and therefore natural farming is also being promoted. We are also promoting the local breed of the cattle, which is very sustainable, which is very resilient, and the cow dung and things that we get as a result is very useful in enriching soil again. So if we see the urea subsidy and all this thing, it is in tune of more than 3 lakh crore annually. So if we really make people aware about all this thing and make economical model in such a way so that we do a direct benefit transfer, and then we say control over the subsidy, then definitely there will be control on the unsustainable use of those fertilizers, and that will really help in our this net zero ambition. And also in transport sector, the progress is being made with the energy transition. So the new factory that is coming up in Gujarat with the help of Maruti will have one of the largest manufacturing unit of automobile, which will support our energy transition ambition. So energy storage in terms of battery, or in maybe in terms of the pump storage, or maybe green hydrogen. These all are going hand in hand at the same time, as sir told in the morning, Anusandhan research. So research is also happening with the tie-up of many international consortiums and companies that are coming to Gujarat. They claim that they will have solar panels of 26% efficiency and 50 years life, as per the statement by the biggest industrial house of India in their annual meeting happened last month. So these are some of the very good thing that is happening. No doubt, we really require to constantly monitor the emission, and this website and this entire exercise is so useful and very unique in our type of country, and this is the beauty of our say collective action of the world's largest democracy towards the its responsibility towards the climate action, and the our global leadership that we have put in place in last few years, which may be in terms of the International Solar Alliance and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, and now with the Lifestyle for Environment thing. So this will be very helpful, and definitely our traditional practices, our heritage and ancient knowledge, the how to store water with the help of these all monuments that we have in Gujarat. We have also published the book book called Gujarat Ni Parampara. So that has all compilation of various things that we do take care at the household level, and which really reduces the GHG emission. So this is from my side, and I again thank you for accommodating me, and thank you for calling me here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we have a panel discussion now, or a panel reaction now to our results. I'd like to invite to the dais Mr. Subhashish Dey from Shakti Foundation. Subhashish is the Director of Climate Policy and Finance Program at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And before joining Shakti, he has about 17 years experience in advising governments, multilateral and bilateral organizations and businesses on energy efficiency and climate change. Good to have you, Subhashish. I'd also like to call Urmi Goswami, she's the assistant editor at Economic Times. And she's been, a lot of you would be aware of her name, if not, if you don't know her personally. She's been writing about climate change and its impacts on science, domestic policy, etc., and international negotiations. And so it's good to have you, Urmi. I'd also like to invite Mr. Lokendra Thakkar, or should I say Dr. Lokendra Thakkar? Mr. Lokendra Thakkar. So Mr. Lokendra is how shall one say, a friend and a colleague of many years. He works as he's an environmental planner, a development communicator, and he works on project design and management in sustainable development, climate change, and biodiversity. He is the person who handles the State Knowledge Management Center on Climate Change of the Madhya Pradesh government. And he's also the officer in charge of the State Wetland Authority and a senior scientist at the Environmental Planning and Coordination Organization. I would also like to welcome Ulka, who's not here physically, but she will be, or she has already joined us and has been with us online. Ulka is an economist with 2 decades of experience in climate change research, capacity building and outreach, GHG inventory, and CDM. She is currently the director of the climate change program at WRI India. And she's widely published and has made several policy formulating contributions, both nationally as well as internationally. In addition, I would like to invite Dr. Niveta Jain to join the panel. Dr. Niveta Jain, most of you would know her or of her. She's an expert on agriculture, Indian agriculture, and she works on aspects related to Indian agriculture and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. She's done a lot of path-breaking work in India on aspects such as rice cultivation and on other sorts of agricultural practices and their impacts on climate change and the association between climate change and agriculture. So good to have you all on board. I am told that Ulka is also pushed for time and would like to leave us early. So I will invite Ulka to give her address first, and then I would invite the experts on the dais to give their reactions to our results. Ulka?
Thank you very much, Raman, and thanks to Vasudha Foundation. I've been listening with great interest. You're able to hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, congratulations to the entire team at GHG Platform India for the painstaking work and also the very simple visuals that have been made available on the website. So it's a great asset to the entire research and policy making community in India. I wanted to take the opportunity to make 3 points today. The first, that it's extremely useful to have trends and subcategories to focus on, which the GHG Platform India data provides. Some sectors are currently very small, but are growing fast. And as India starts looking at tackling its net zero 2070 target over the next few decades, these sectors will start growing in importance. So the GHG Platform data gives very important insights for policies and strategies. And I'll just give a couple of examples. First, industry is a very important sector for jobs. The IPPU sector, the industrial production process emissions for India as a whole have increased, have doubled over the last 13 years, as the data shows today. Karthik pointed out that for India as a whole, cement industry is a big driver of emissions. But in Maharashtra and Gujarat, chemical industry or ammonia becomes a big driver of the IPPU emissions. Of course, industries can do a lot in terms of reducing their energy use, switching to cleaner energy. But beyond that, the process emissions become harder to abate and will require an increase in material efficiency like recycling, reuse, repurposing. But reducing the production of virgin materials could have a dampening effect on jobs and GDP, unless we explicitly create new circular economy jobs in repair and recycling. So this is an important pointer for the complementary economic policies that need to go hand in hand with the environmental or climate actions. The second example I wanted to give was from the waste sector. Waste sector is very important for quality of life, for health, not just for emissions. Nikhil showed us that waste sector emissions have increased at 2% compound annual growth rate over the period of study. But in Tamil Nadu, if you see where these emissions from waste are coming from, they're not coming so much from solid waste, as 35% is coming from industrial wastewater. In Bihar, 75% of the waste emissions are coming from rural domestic wastewater. So this tells us that solid waste management, actually there are policies and actions that are underway to manage solid waste through municipal action. But going forward, it will become very important to enforce mandates on the private sector, on the corporate sector, to manage industrial wastewater, and also to build sewage treatment infrastructure, the kinds of capacities that Nikhil spoke about. The second broad point I want to make is the distributional impact across income groups. And in the future, what GHG Platform India might be able to take up is, just like you have disaggregated across states, across sectors, perhaps you might want to think about whether this can be disaggregated across income groups, perhaps consumption-based emissions. For example, in a recent study, researchers from Princeton University and WRI India have found out that in cities like Delhi, the 20% richest households have 3 times the carbon footprint as the poorest 20%, which means that there is scope for lifestyle change of the most affluent households. But this lifestyle change needs to be supported by creating infrastructure, for example, last mile connectivity for public transport, and also the right kind of policies, for example, time of day tariffs. And my last point, as Karthik showed, is that the data for micro and small MSMEs is severely lacking. These are 60 million units employing 100 million persons. And this will need a major effort of data collection going forward, a combination of the government and of other voluntary efforts. The reason why this is so important is because they have low-cost opportunities for energy efficiency and GHG mitigation, and MSME supply chains, or what are called scope 3 emissions, can potentially be brought into India's new carbon market. So with that, let me just compliment again the entire GHG Platform India team for this massive effort, and thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words today. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ulka. So now do we go from the edge to the center in that sense? Shubhashish, you first.
Thank you, Raman. I hope I'm audible. First of all, I'd like to thank the whole team of GHGPI for putting up the effort. And I know that it has been a tremendous effort put in by all the 5 organizations who are part of this GHGPI and had been part of this GHGPI for last 4 phases. Shakti had been collaborating with this platform from its inception, and I'm glad to be here when we are presenting the 4th phase results. Now today I'd like to discuss on 2 topics. One is that how this inventory is useful for decision making. A lot has been already talked about. I'm not going to repeat that, but one area which I believe is critical and has not been talked about is the usefulness of this inventory while designing future climate or energy models. The scenarios which are built on mostly the time series data which needs to be available, and the kind of granularity which GHGPI provides, at least at the national level, helps the researcher to develop those energy usage scenario, energy generation scenarios using various energy models. And that again fits into the decision process of various government agencies. So this is one area which I believe is critical, and the contribution of GHGPI has been tremendous. The second part is that we are a developing economy, and as a country, currently our per capita emission is something around 2.5 ton. And most of, again, these energy modeling studies have indicated that we are going to cap at around 4 tons per billion, sorry, per capita. What it means that we are going to grow in terms of emission. Our absolute emission in all likelihood is going to grow. We don't see it coming down in at least in next 1 decade. And here again, this time series platform actually helps us to understand that this is again a growth trajectory which every country has gone through. In the hindsight, most of the developed world has a emission number of more than 10. Even China is closer to 10 currently, the per capita emission. So for us, it has to be again looked upon as the historical emission and not the emission for a particular year. So again, as far as the international negotiation is concerned, this kind of time series data helps a lot. Most of the information which comes from various countries are developed by the country government, but this is an again independent research done by 5 very renowned organizations, peer-reviewed outcomes, which are validated through various researchers and civil society organization, which means that it's not something which is influenced by government, but does complement whatever the numbers which the government of India is also showing, which reflects that the numbers coming from the country are not really debatable. Now, the second component is the additional work which needs to be done. One is definitely when we move from the national level to the sub-national level, with different kind of granularity is required. Currently, the data set which is available is mostly looking at the IPCC sectors, which is great. But when we start working at the sub-national level, we need to break those IPCC data. A lot of work has already been done, but I believe more has to be done in terms of like breaking it into the end-use sectors like the transport sector, housing, industry sector to a better level of granularity. Ulka has already mentioned about the need of looking at MSME sector more closely. At the same time, India is also opening up to a domestic as well as international carbon market. So how this information will be useful for developing those indices, at least as far as the domestic carbon market is concerned, we also need to look into that. And finally, we are also aware that it's not country which emits, is basically the activities or economic activities which happens, and most of them are driven by business. From next year onwards, the top 1,000 companies who are enlisted in BSE are going to report of their carbon emission, at least their scope 1 carbon emission. Now, we also need to understand and identify ways and means of how this national and sub-national inventory are going to get integrated or talk with each other with the new inventory which will be developed by the private sector. Some work has happened in the global north, so some experience is available with us, but going forward, we also need to look into integrating those numbers with the carbon inventory which are developed at the national and subsequently at the sub-national level. With this, I will like to pause and request the next speaker. No comment.
Sorry. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me as a panelist. I think it's a bit of having a little bit of a break so that everybody can catch their breath, because in the sea of everybody who's spoken, I'm the one without any expertise. But on the other hand, I'm the one who will have to write about it and convey what I learned here to others ahead, to a larger audience. I'm hoping that there are many in that larger audience. One of the interesting things is when this email came to me, it's around the same time I was reading an interview with Baroness Bryony Worthington, who, of course, is one of those people who worked on the UK's climate change law. And she said something interesting, which kind of stuck in my head. She said, you know, it was the late 1990s, and you could get a lot of the emission data from the internet. And you realize that that's something that doesn't happen here. So I want to, first of all, sort of thank the GHG platform for making it possible for us in India to go on the internet and get the data easily in a manner that people like me who are not experts can understand. And that's a huge service done, because at the end of the day, you know, everybody tells us things, but how do we sort of place that information with markers or test the information that being given for its factual basis, if we don't have a place to go to, and the platform gives us that. So thank you for that. For me, who has been writing on this issue, and there is Srini in the room who will remember me from my really raw days in Copenhagen, when I wouldn't have known anything about anything, to today when I know a little bit about some of the things that you know, we are constantly being bombarded with information, and yet we have no way of not only testing that information that's been given, but asking the next question. Why is it that we are, why is a certain decision being taken, or what is the factual basis for that? And this, for me, again, I would say the value of the platform lies there. To not take too much time, there's another point that I would wish to make. And that is as follows. As Ulka said it way more eloquently than I can, the fact is that when we talk about the climate conversation globally, there is the politics of it, which is, you know, which we heard Dr. Bhatt speak about in the morning, about how South Asia's cumulative emission contribution is just 4%, and so on and so forth. And you know, what should we do on or the responsibility of the developed world, none of which I'm denying. That's one part of it. The other part is science, which we read through the IPCC reports and other such, you know, other scientific publications. And of course, within that is the experience of it, which we have all experienced. We have been experiencing through the years, but I think we got a booster dose this year of what climate change impacts are like. And both ourselves, especially people, anybody who's been in this country, but also anybody who's been alive to the news anywhere in the world. So we've got a booster dose. So the question then comes is, how those of us who are in the field of writing or reporting, how do we ensure that this bit of the conversation remains alive? And is there a need to separate out the politics, which is important and critical, to what really needs to be done? And again, once again, when I look at you know, the publication that you put out today, the briefing, you see exactly where the growth lines are, where if possible you're flattening out. So then it becomes easier for people like me to ask the questions of you, the experts, but also of those who are in the policy making thing. But why do we keep harping in a certain way? Why are we not talking about you know, some other sectors, or why is it that we are dismissing some sectors as being too small to matter? And this is the critical part of it. And to my mind, I think that is where I, as a journalist, would come back to that. For me, a tool like this is critical because it helps bring a certain basis, a rational basis to what I'm writing, right? We tend to dismiss a lot. I mean, if you look at the general sway of the conversation, it is always about the energy sector. But the fact is that, agriculture matters, and it might be, methane might just be 16% agriculture might just be 16%, right? Agriculture, yeah, 16%, and methane is again only a subsector of that. But should we just turn a blind eye to that? And it's again important also when you're being bombarded with information from outside this country, well, let's say, why doesn't India participate in the methane pledge? And then at least you have the numbers to go with. So so basically, this is what I really want to say, that thank you so much for the platform. I remember when you launched it, and I'm very happy to have been along for this journey. And you have made my writing better, and I hope to continue to sort of, stand on your shoulders. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here after, I think, 2 long years of, hiatus, I think I may call it. I came to Delhi in last Feb 2020. And then I think I came for a very short visit, but no events participation. This is the first time I'm coming to Delhi to participate in an event, and that too on climate change. So I'm happy, and thank you very much for inviting me for this very important event. All the partners of GHG platforms, and especially Vasudha Foundation, with whom we are also working in Madhya Pradesh on various sectors. I've been part of earlier also of this platform when I think first time when you had launched the report here at IHC itself, and we had benefited from the research and studies that the platform is doing. I've been asked to speak on 2 points. Rini, sort of gave me cue rather to which are the 2 points that I should be speaking on. But first thing, I'm very happy that you've done so, elaborated and an analytical study on the emissions coming from different sectors and also from different states. I was curious about MP as if my results are coming. I had the same kind of curiosity as if I'm getting my 10th board or 12th board kind of a result. And I picked up, I was looking, MP was slightly on a different, side, all the brochures that you have placed over the reception counter. So I looked at MP and immediately started learning about how MP is faring. And it's not good. We barely passed the exam. We are rather failing. But there are reasons for us not to perform better. And then I immediately compared to Shwetal, the Gujarat, and I said we are even poor. So that's the we look at UP, you look at Maharashtra, you look at Rajasthan, similar size states, Gujarat, and I just want to pick up my on MP. So we have about 6.14% of India's population, and we are contributing to only 3.86% of GDP, whereas our contribution to the net GHG emission is 7.28%, just double. I was looking at Gujarat, they are almost same. Their contribution to GDP is about 8%, 8.5%, and their emissions are about 9%. So this is something, a cause of worry, that if we go by GHG intensity, Our GDP contribution is 3.86, whereas our emission is 7.28%. The second figure, I mean, I just want to give you some, already numbers are there. Nothing that I have contributed in, developing these numbers. But look at the forest of MP, 25.14% of the total land area of the state, as compared to the country's 10.87%. And the per capita, which is the only indicator, and that is how the India has also been, making its case in the global scenario. Our GDP per capita is 2.65, and the national per capita is 2.24. So per capita is high. We have largest forest cover. I'm giving this contradictory numbers. I'm not able to, still come to terms to these numbers. I mean, I'm not doubting. I'm just trying to understand the reasons. I'm simply saying that these numbers are important for us. I'm simply trying to understand the latent and, nuances and get into the details of these numbers. The density, in India is 401 per kilometer square, and in MP it's 263. So these numbers have some messages for us, and we need to look at. And while we are, in fact, while I was sitting on the dais, I got a call from the Chief Secretary office that your state plan has finally been approved. And immediately, because day after tomorrow, there is a meeting of all the environment ministers taking place in Kevadia, Gujarat, where the first on the top of the agenda of the ministry, happening meeting day after tomorrow. Urmi must be knowing about it. So, so this is the first agenda is state action plans. So we wanted that we are not considered to be laggard there in the national global review meeting on state action plans. So we got our acts together and got our state action plan approved by the Chief Secretary Committee. And we immediately wanted to shoot a letter to the Government of India that we have also sort of approved our plan and submitting to you for your necessary actions. So important thing is that whether these numbers have any meaning for us, where people like us are working at the subnational level. And Mr. Raghav is here. He will correct me if I'm wrong. And I've been seeking guidance from Mr. Bhatt in my professionally, personally, officially, informally, about the GHG inventories. This is a very important and very delicate subject. And it has to be seen as a country, not as a state or any sector. What country is thinking and what country's policies are at the global negotiation level. That is how it has to be looked at. But we at the state level are not very encouraged, rather, by the Government of India to carry out our own state level inventories. We have the information from various secondary sources, but at the state level, in fact, in 2010, with the help of the Shakti, at the MP level, we took a, slightly adventurous kind of a step where we, got our state GHG inventory, thanks to Shakti for supporting that initiative. They engaged Ernst & Young company, and they did a fairly good work with marginal abatement cost curves, not only the emission profile, but also cost curves. But normally, Government of India doesn't encourage states, and we have in writing also by our the particular vertical in the ministry which is dealing with the state action plans. And I sought their guidance. Should we be doing this kind of study? And they said, not really. But when we do a state action plans, I mean, this is one of the most important, ingredient or source of information that has to be factored into policy making. While we know what are the vulnerabilities of the states in different time zones, different sectoral, sectors or different departments or different districts and time, but we don't know what is our emission levels, where are we now, what kind of actions, policies are needed to sort of mitigate or to reduce our emissions. So we are in fix. We get the climate data from the IIT in Pune. We have the very detailed vulnerability assessment reports through Department of Science and Technology. But the third most important thing, which I consider as important element of the state action plan on climate change, is the understanding of the greenhouse gas inventory and what is the baseline emissions and where are we going in times to come. In that context, the studies carried out by GHG platform, is very helpful for us. We do refer to the NetCom studies, but there I don't find too much of a state level, segregation where we can understand what actually coming from the state of Madhya Pradesh. So I congratulate you, and we are using your information and data for devising our own strategies at the state level. Subject to the corrections by the Government of India, because the state action plan will be submitted to Government of India, and there the National Steering Committee will take a view. Before that, there is a expert committee under the Joint Secretary and consulted with different departments. So if there are any errors of omissions or commission, those errors can be rectified at the Government of India level while the state action plan is approved. So this is where I just wanted to emphasize here that MP, like other countries, MP is a huge state with about 80 million people and 800 million rather. And we have huge, large land area, forest, diversity of issues, climate issues. So in a sense, it's like a country. It's a big, huge state. So we must be having these kinds of information in order to make a very robust and very, acceptable, important, doable action plan. So this is our first thing that I wanted to share. The other things, what are we suggesting in the state action plans? Because based on the vulnerability and adaptation needs, we have identified set of actions that are proposed in for different sectors. But for mitigation side, as you know, in MP also the energy sector is the most leading sector which is contributing. And MP is also one of the state in the country which is contributing to renewables in a great way, especially solar and also hydro power. So this is one area which, like Shwetal said, this is doable. We can work on the renewables in order to achieve our targets. But let me say that the thermal power, the coal-fired thermal power plants are continue to be there. It's a reality. We cannot shy away from this reality that we will be sort of phasing out or phasing what is the word, phase down and phasing out. I'm not getting into that kinds of semantics of the words, but I just want to say that coal is a reality and MP is a coal bearing state. Majority of the coal power is also being exported to different states. So we will have to have this kind of reality, and we'll have to have the numbers which may not be pleasing to us, but that's a reality of the time. Do you have any? Yeah, so there are things which have been suggested in the state action plans. I'm not getting into the details. We have talked about on adaptations, also about agriculture. Paddy is one. I just wanted to take a minute also on that. Last 10 years, MP was a soya state, as you know, tiger state, soya state. These kinds of titles MP has been having, but not anymore. We are a soya state. MP is now growing great way on paddy cultivation. Last 5-10 years, if you see kilometers after kilometers, districts after districts, which have never had any history of paddy cultivations, are moving to paddy. Thanks to market, thanks to climate also, because soybean is a climate sensitive crop, and if any rains are erratic or if not on time, farmers are sustaining huge losses on soybean. Therefore, the paddy cultivation has increased in a big way in a state of Madhya Pradesh, which may contribute. But then we have suggested that there are other techniques, and I would suggest the lady from Mrs. Dr. Jain from the IRI that there are methods where we can minimize emissions from the agriculture sector. Livestock is also MP is I think about 4.4 crore numbers of livestock, huge numbers. And it's a challenge for us to see how can we minimize the emission from the livestock sector as well. Forest, again, big forest area, but also has a challenge because emissions coming from forestry, deforestation, forest fires, these are challenges, but we have suggested all those strategies in this state action plan. Thank you for inviting me. We use your information. We also share this information on our platform, on our portals, and acknowledging your work. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say that I think some of the points that Lokendra was making are points that maybe Mr. Ajay Raghav would want to respond to. So I think immediately after Dr. Jain does her, her address, I would want Mr. Ajay Raghav to come and, respond to Lokendra as well as any other reactions that he may have. And then I will open up to the floor if that's all right with everybody. Yeah.
Thanks to GHG platform for giving me the opportunity to talk here. And I would compliment the GHG platform for bringing up such a nice inventory starting from 2005 to up to 18. And especially, am I audible now? Yeah. I think it will be better now. Yeah. I think that's better. So it's a huge work because we've been involved in preparing the inventory for agriculture sector with ministry since the first national communication. So it's a huge work to work with different sectors, and they have made the not only national but subsectoral level also. So this will help all the states in developing their policy. Mainly I'll talk about the agriculture sector. Nowadays in the global literature, it's flooded with mitigation of agriculture sector, and people are coming with the different publications that agriculture has so much of potential. And more so like our different policies or have been blamed, like green revolution has been blamed for increasing the emissions of India. In fact, I would say India was shipped to mouth earlier. Now India, instead of, then it came to land to feeding the people, and now India is exporting to different countries. So agriculture has made tremendous development, but as India was blamed for methane emissions, now slowly they are moving for the nitrous oxide emission from agriculture sector because our fertilizer consumption is increasing. So India is being slowly blamed for increasing the nitrous oxide emissions, though our emissions are increasing, but we have a big population to feed in and we are exporting also. But if on the other hand, if we see the agriculture emissions, like our per unit area emissions, fertilizer use is very less compared to other countries. It's less than approximately 70% of our area is fertilized of the total 142 million hectare of the land area, which is net cultivated. Of that, only 70 to 72% is only fertilized. It varies from year to year depending upon the rainfall and climate. And if you see the average per unit area of the fertilized area, which is applied with the fertilizer consumption is around 90 to 95 kg per hectare. This is very less if we compare with the global and emissions. If we talk about the South Asian emissions, as Dr. Bhatt has mentioned in the morning, it's only 4%. We talk about India's emission. If we take India as a whole, and agriculture emission is only 0.65%. And if we talk about methane, that is only 0.11%. So why a lot of hue and cry? And people are talking about decarbonization of agriculture sector, which to me seems to be difficult, and India is not ready for that. Also, we should not go for, because we have a very small land holding with the farmers. The farmers are very poor. So they have less than a hectare land per farmer on an average. So decarbonization to me seems difficult and we should not go for that.
only decarbonization aspect, which I see in the near future, maybe energy use in the agriculture sector, and our national policy for biofuel is there. So slowly and slowly we can move there, maybe in the solar panels and the water pumping. And then use of biofuels in the mechanized agriculture, where in tractors and all now and pumping for the water. We can use the solar pump instead of diesel pump. We can go for biofuels, blended fuels. Now, as rightly said by other panelists also, that coal is the reality. We cannot completely move away from the coal, but along with that, co-firing with some waste material or second generation materials can be of use in the agriculture sector also. And the government has made several policies like for being coated urea. So whole urea which is sold in India is being coated. Besides that, we can come up with the research-based, several other plant-based fertilizers or slow release fertilizers, which can help in reducing the emissions. And here we have to take care of both, because if we reduce the nitrous oxide emission, we are bound to increase the volatilization losses. So we have to come up with the fertilizers which not only reduce nitrous oxide, but also reduces the indirect emissions. So we have to go for such kind of technologies. And for rice also, government is implementing in like in Punjab, around 5 lakh hectare was under the direct seeded of rice. Those technologies have their own plus and minuses, like we reduce the methane emission, we increase the nitrous oxide emissions also. So we have to go for a trade-off kind of thing between both the gases in agriculture sector. Like it has been said that in MP, area for rice is increasing, but I think pulses should not be reduced, because India is importing pulses, and pulse help us in nitrogen fixation in the soil also. Not only for moon, there, like we've been monitoring at IRI, we have a satellite receiving station. Yeah. But even then, wheat burning is taking place. And Pusa Institute has developed, our microbiology division has developed a biodecomposer, Pusa biodecomposer. Delhi government is taking initiative. Right now, we are working on the emission pattern. We are not sure about how emissions, it's in the infancy stage only about the emission studies. We have initiated that, how emission will benefit. But that I can assure, the emissions will not be that much, because when we burn, then whole lot of emission takes place in fraction of few hours. Emissions are there. But when you are incorporating in the soil, it will be slowly and slowly mineralizing. So emissions will be slow, and there will be mixing in the atmosphere. So burning, I would say it's a complete no-no. So, but I don't know why in MP, a lot of burning is taking place in the wheat. So stop. Please request the farmers to stop that. And maybe you can try with I have initiated the studies with the wheat biomass also, how the decomposer works. So let's see. And finally, I would congratulate the GHG platform that they have made a state level inventory that would help the policymakers.
Thanks, ma'am. Ajay ji, would you want to come and be the first reactor? Or should I give you the mic?
So thank you, and good to be speaking again on this. I would not like to go into one-to-one conversation with Dr. Loken. Yes. So I think this is, as I stressed, and I think almost all of them have spoken, that this is a very important tool for the state governments to act on. And I was also earlier part of this platform when it was released in 2019. So I think a lot of good work has been done. I once again congratulate the GHG platform on this. The numbers, preliminary numbers, which I could see today from the brochures as well as the presentation, these are more or less, or I would say almost similar to what we have done nationally. So the total sum of the state's inventory is almost very similar to, so we are right now finalizing our 2019 inventory totals, which will be released through our third national communication. So, so we will have that comparison. If you remember that we have also mentioned this in our previous biennial update report also, that the estimations are very similar to what has been brought out by the GHG platform in terms of the state inventories. We have also verified our emissions in terms of CO2 and the methane from the IITM study, which has Dr. Patel also mentioned in the morning, has been done through the other sources like the remote sensing and satellite and the drone and the aircraft emissions data. In terms of, I think there is a good input to the national inventory is that some of the areas which we are lacking, for example, the small and medium enterprises data, which is also has been pointed out by various experts when we go through this our inventory, because you all know that the UNFCCC has a rigorous process of evaluating our national inventories and the biennial update reports. So under that process, we do get comments that several areas like the small and medium enterprises have not been fully covered, although they are covered in terms of the usage of the fuels. So I think that is one input which I can see from the report, this report. The other thing which I also observe is that the data from the rural areas, because this is something which is also missing. And in some of the reports, I could see that there is data which is also reported from the rural areas. That is good. But again, for the wastewater and the waste sector, I could see that many of these things are based on the population projections or population data, which is a very crude method of estimating the waste emissions. And that is also lacking at the national level. So I think this is an area of improvement, especially in terms of industrial wastewater. Nobody has any concrete data on how much of volumes and the characteristics of that data in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is something which is lacking, which we do it through ED, who is our national partner on this. So we always confront them on the data. Wastewater, again, data comes from CPCB and FPCB, which is also because I was also in CPCB long time back. So I know how it has been calculated. This is also based on the population projection. So we need to go into the field and see that how much is the BOD content, how much is COD content, and how much is the other water characteristics, so that we can able to have more concrete data on the waste. So waste sector is something which is which I saw here also is more or less based on the secondary data, but we need to have generation of the primary data. This will be very useful in terms of the various missions which the government is taking, including Swachh Bharat mission and others. So as far as the comment which Dr. Thakkar had mentioned is that we don't discourage any state. First of all, we don't discourage any state to have inventory. We have seen that there have been efforts. I have been earlier participating in a TERI project which had prepared the inventory for the Andhra Pradesh, the unified Andhra Pradesh. And there have been other, I think, initiatives on and off by various states. So state level inventory is welcome, but my only contention was that if we don't have any guidelines. We have a guideline for the national inventory. I mentioned this in the morning also. We need a proper state level guidelines, because anything which comes out from the government has to be based on concrete basis. It has to have the rigor. It also has to have the third party evaluation. So when we say the national inventory has this numbers, we say it with confidence because we are following the IPCC guidelines. It is also reviewed by the 10 independent experts appointed by the UNFCCC. So we have something which we can defend. So we encourage states to have more rigor and robustness in their inventories, and we don't discourage that. As far as the state action plans are concerned, I think we are following these guidelines and revised guidelines which have been issued. I personally don't see that portfolio in the climate change division. But as far as I understand that the state action plans are more or less more focused towards the adaptation orientation. And mitigation is increasingly being important and is something which we all have to aspire to. But as a developing country, I think adaptation is also important, and our energies and focus also have to adhere to those directions. So I think the state level inventories is a good, I think, initiation by this platform. I would urge, if I am not aware, but if you have officially given this to all the states, this should be given to the state so that they can further react on it if some state wants to react on this data. And if they agree, then they should use this internally for their own planning process. I'm happy that some states like Madhya Pradesh take this very seriously. I think this is something which is desirable. It is also desirable in the sense that we have international commitments. India has ambitious plans in terms of NDCs and also the long-term strategy, which is going to be released soon. So, and we also have a net zero plan. But our contention was that if anything goes into the public domain from the government side, then it should be based on the robust data and methodology. And it should be owned by the state government. If they are owning it and they certify that this is based on the data which they have provided and which is the latest and following the inventory, we don't have any issues. So there is no point of discouraging any states or bringing out. This has to be a regular exercise. This cannot be just in particular 1 year, because I think the very important point which he mentioned was about the share in the GDP and the share in the GHG. So I think this is a very clear indication to the states that they are lagging behind in reduction of the emission intensity, because the emission intensity is basically the ratio between the GDP and GHG. So if we have a target of 45% now, so we can now target those 3 states which are lagging behind in terms of the emission intensity reduction. So I think this analysis somebody has to do, and there could be 50 different parameters which you can base on your inventory. And I think Niti Aayog will also be very keen to use this data, because they have been coordinating this GIRG, which we are participating in various indices. I mentioned that there are 14 indices which the highest office wants us, India's ranking, to be improved. And those ranking can only be improved then when we improve we invest in the reform action plans in the states. So we have under the climate change performance index and environment performance index, also suggested to Niti Aayog certain indicators which states have to follow. And many of them are also based on the GHG inventory. So because of the lack of uniform information for all the states, we are not able to take those indicators. So I think this platform and this information will be useful in that context, so that we can have measurable improvement over the years, and we have some benchmarks. So for example, we have a benchmark of 2005 for our emission intensity reduction. So similar benchmarks if states also have, so that they can be in healthy competition in terms of improvement, whether it's the installed capacity of renewable energy, whether it is the share of the geographical area in the forest cover, or even in terms of agriculture residue cover. So we can have various indicators. But if this data first has to be owned by the states, they have to be based on the correct science, certified by the states, and then we can, I think, have this. And some of the states are free to raise this issue in the day after tomorrow also, when there is a meeting where I am also participating, and I think most of the states will be there. So under the agenda on the climate action, I think this is a very important issue which I think should be raised. So I once again congratulate this group for providing us this state level data. And this is the need of the hour. And my only suggestion is that we need to make it more participative in terms of participation of the state governments. And we should also have a nodal officer in the states who is actually giving you the data, because what you are taking maybe from various secondary sources, various publications, we don't have at the national level, the state level data for all the states. So it is your duty to have it at the state level, but state should also come forward, because this data is actually going to help them. And you are doing free service for them. So I think they should be grateful for that. So I see it in that perspective. And as far as numbers, I again say that they're very close to what we have. So thank you.
Just take care, because there will be questions from you. Just take it up front on the. Yeah. Yeah, so I think our, our state numbers, so the last time we did the state numbers, we did send by speed post copies, multiple copies of the state level analysis to all the states departments, the nodal departments. We got some queries back, and we sort of followed up on them, but it was just at the level of information. So they wanted more information. But I think now there will be probably greater traction in terms of states wanting to use these numbers as a basis of planning and integrating into their developmental processes and so on. So I think we've already overshot our time. So what I'll suggest is the following. If there are questions from the floor right now, we'll take them all in a stack. You can address them to specific panelists if you want, or if you want the panelists, any or all panelists to react to your question, you say so. There are also some questions that are stacked in the online conversation, which I've been informed about. I'll read those out for the panelists to respond. And then the panelists respond, we do that one round and we finish. Does that sound like a good plan? So any questions anybody wants to? And what I'd like to say is that keep the comments to a minimum. Comments can be, done in a one-to-one discussion, but if there are questions, specific queries, then you're welcome to, It's just a suggestion. I'm not laying down the law.
Thanks. My name is Elizabeth Dubois from Oxford Policy Management, located in India. So I'm probably one of your user groups, definitely a beneficiary of this. We regularly produce policy level research on climate change. So thank you very much for all this data that you regularly give us. I'm trying to turn it into a question. So sometimes when I'm producing analysis for a particular agency, I'm particularly sensitive on whether it's official data or and what would be really useful, and you can perhaps tell me if it's not possible, is if you were specifically able to compare the data that the analysis that you produce with what's coming from the government. So, for example, looking at the India's per capita emissions, in some cases I might be nervous about reporting your data if I think there's an inconsistency with what the government is putting out there. So, when you are able to put that comparison, it would be really helpful for me so that I don't have to then, maybe I'm being lazy, but go and compare it with what exists out there. But I don't know if maybe it's not possible.
I think that's a question to ask. And so to answer the question, all the data that we use is official, publicly available data. So the activity data and the basis on which the calculations are done are all official. We give out a comparison. Like in the presentations today, we gave out comparisons of variations, if any. And if you want more information, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can email us or you can contact us separately. But yeah, it's all official data. So that was not a question to any of the panelists. You want to go first? So we are collecting questions right now. So your question can also come. Yeah.
So my question is for Mr. Raghavan, and it's about state inventories or states that do their inventories needing to follow certain parameters. I'm wondering what will it take GOI to actually make that a norm across states, because aren't they thinking with the net zero target, though I know it's 50 years from now, but shouldn't we be thinking in terms of effort sharing among the states? One of the things Dr. Thakkar mentioned about no, I think it was Ulka, but it doesn't matter, about some states being having more emissions from chemicals, others having from other industry, somebody from agriculture. So clearly there has to be a better understanding of the granularity of emissions across the country and effort sharing, because we keep talking about just transition. We keep talking about just transition in the international context, but we also need to have that domestic conversation. So I'm wondering, what will it take GOI to bring some uniformity in terms of and making states do their emission inventories in a mandatory fashion? And of course, where the platform can help in this.
Yeah, one question. Hello everyone, I'm Kunal Gandhi from Climate Center for Cities at National Institute of Urban Affairs. So a lot of now cities are developing climate action plans, which has a bit of GHG emissions inventory as well. And a lot of them are trying to develop net zero targets for themselves as well. How can maybe that be aligned to state or national level targets? Can there be some kind of formulation on those lines as well? Because currently there is no direct linkages between climate action planning for cities or even with district as well. Maybe with state action climate plan in place, can that be scaled down to district as well, so that there can be some amount of alignment on those lines?
So some questions that are in the online chat, I'll just repeat them out. So one is I think that's to Dr. Niveta Jain, which is paddy straw has been considered as a renewable biomass by CDM. And hence burning biomass is not considered as a source of long-term GHG emissions, as the same can be sequestered in the next crop cycle. Hence baseline emissions is considered as zero. What is the take of the panel on this? So if Dr. Jain could answer this. And then should we consider crop stubble burning as a GHG emission source from a non-renewable biomass? That's also another question of technical nature. And then there's a question on how to reduce emissions from agriculture and livestock sector and alternative and so on. I think you partly answered that, but if you could address it. Any other questions that haven't yet come up from the online chat? Or yeah, you want to go? Yeah, okay.
Person from the ministry.
Into the mic, please.
Yeah, the person from the ministry would be able to answer this. So I was wondering that, we are kind of deliberating on what would be the sharing of the states in terms of meeting the 2070 target or whatever, right? I'm wondering that how participative was the process of, coming up with that target at all? Were the states consulted by the ministry of teaching that, okay, we are changing from 33 to 45% in carbon intensity? What would be the sharing, or was it like a kind of a ministry's decision or the cabinet decision to come up? So if we were not participating in the first process and then come up with a target and now want them to participate across sectors and whatever, it's kind of a unfair process. So I'm just wondering what was the process and how are we then planning to go forward with that? Because I think participation of state is anyway required and we can't go without it.
So that's to Ajay ji. Yeah. So should we close the stack? Close the stack, it's gone. Yeah, going, gone. So if the panelists could respond, please, maybe Ajay ji first.
Yeah, I think there were two questions. Firstly, I would like to respond to the last question. The process of consultation has happened. I think you were mainly mentioning about the NDC. So in October 2015, when the first NDC was given, we had participation and consultations. It was a long-run process. In 2014-15, they were based on the greenhouse gas inventory modeling studies also. So there were like a number of studies which was awarded by the ministry and used for the numerical numbers which we came out with. And these then were consulted with all stakeholders, including industry and the NGOs also. So there was a wide consultation. Even in the revised one also, there have been consultations. We are now processing the long-term strategy of the country. And again, we have consulted the states. So there have been extensive consultations, not only with the states, but also with at least 20 different ministries, which is actually directly involved in the climate action. So there has been extensive process and the implications of these are quite wide ranging. So it is not that one ministry is going to decide about the whole country. So we do have the long run consultation process in which various committees are also existing. There are various sectoral committees which have given inputs. So these are carefully examined and then taken into consideration. On the question which was asked about first of all, there is no mandatory requirement, even though there is a mandatory requirement, but you can't force even the countries to give in. We have seen that even the United States have not given the national communication for several years. Out of 140 countries, 140 developing countries, only 50 have given their PUR. So there are more than 100 countries, or even around 100 countries, which have not even given their PURs. So
even the international architecture cannot force anybody to give information which they don't want to give. So it is not for us to have a mandatory requirement that states have this information. But as you know that we have these targets which on the various targets which we have formulated for the NDCs and also the net zero target. Many of them are driven by the national projects. For example, we have the PAT scheme. So you all know that the energy emissions presently contribute more than 75%. Globally, as well as in India also, it is 75%. And these are, out of this, around 43% comes from the electricity sector. So electricity sector, thermal power plants are governed by the Environmental Protection Act, whether the same plant is in Tamil Nadu or in Karnataka or in UP, will be governed by the Environmental Protection Act and the emission factors which have been prescribed by the Government of India. So they have to follow. So there is no point in saying that the Tamil Nadu has not given any emission inventory or any other state has not given. So there are certain processes which take into consideration those. Similarly, around 9.6% emissions come from the transport sector, which includes the road sector, the civil aviation, railways, which are the railways and the civil aviation are the central subjects. You cannot give targets to states on controlling emissions from these sectors. So these are again, for example, for the road transport, we have uniform policy of Euro 4 to Euro 6, which has been implemented from 1st April 2020 throughout the country. We have specific norms on the fuels as well as on the vehicles. So there is no point in burdening the states in the mitigation targets. Renewable energy, again, expansion. There are national level projects, there are international ISA, and there are many other initiatives which the central government has taken in consultation with the states. Various ministries have their own sectoral programs, whether it is on steel or cement, where we don't see that state governments as such have any role. In fact, their role is mainly on increasing the carbon sinks, for example, the forestry sector. Forestry again is a sector which is both governed by the central and the state, but the states have an important role in increasing the so where we have different initiatives, different sectoral programs, which takes into consideration the total pie of the greenhouse gases. So our intention was never to give any mandatory guidelines or directions for the states, because you believe that even at the national level, we struggle many times to have data. So it is very difficult for states to have that kind of very detailed data. Every state, I am saying. There may be few progressive 3-4 states which may come forward to give the data, but there are bulk of states which may not have. We have a difficulty at the national level to collect those kind of data. And then there are the experts. We have very limited experts. We have IRI, only 2 or 3 experts who do for nationally, and they have been doing it for several decades now. So I think first jumping into state level or district level or city level, I think we have to be very clear that what we want to do and how we have identified that the adaptation, the local level adaptation, the needs. For example, a coastal state may have a sea level rise problem. A state which is getting impacted because of the erratic rainfall, because of has impact on agriculture, the health impact. So these are some of the local things which I think the states have to take care of. Mitigation, if they come with this process, is welcome, and we do encourage, because states also have their own additional programs for increasing the green cover or the any other initiative in terms of energy efficiency. faster adoption of the electrical appliances. If the state gives more incentives, for example, Delhi has given incentives for adoption of the EV vehicles. So I think these are some of the things which the states can do, which I think will add to the national efforts of mitigation. So I think this is a long answer to a question which was have been asked, and I think I gave a very broad reply to give the thinking about what we have at the national level in these areas. Thank you.
There was a question about decreasing the emissions from agriculture sector. First of all, the emissions, and another question was from biomass burning that it is considered as net zero. Yes, crop do uptake carbon dioxide through the process of photosynthesis, and there are emissions from the soil when the soil respire and the plant respire, emission of carbon dioxide. But when we burn the crop residue in a matter of 4 to 6 hours, the whole carbon dioxide is emitted. Along with that, there are non-CO2 GHG emissions, that is methane emission and nitrous oxide emissions. Besides that, there are other pollutants which are emitted into the atmosphere that depends upon the burning condition and the climatic conditions. So the main cause of concern is that it is a renewable wealth which we have, and if we burn it, we emit a lot of ash soot particles and other pollutant which cause the health issues to the farmer who is burning, neighboring states, as well as the people living in that area. And if we apply it to the soil, then it becomes a resource, it enriches our soil. So burning has a lot of other issues also. And then regarding livestock mitigation, then feed modification is the option where we can reduce the emissions. And National Dairy Institute with Indian Council for Agriculture Research is working on it. So that is one option. And emission reduction from agriculture sector is, if we talk about the methane emissions are almost stable since several decades. So we don't have issue with the methane emission, even though the paddy cultivation is very water intensive crop. So different state governments are taking different initiatives to go for alternate wetting and drying or direct seeding of rice and several other parameters. Regarding emission reduction from fertilizer use, a government has already taken a decision to go for neem coating of the whole urea. And then besides that, there are several other options like soil health based, soil testing based fertilizer application. And government has taken the initiative wherein soil health cards have been prepared for different farmers, and it has been suggested that they at regular interval soil health card should be updated. And another option is demand driven nitrogen application, that here also soil health card plays an important role. So whatever plant demands, so based on that, we should apply the fertilizer, like leaf color chart, which was developed by ERI, and is a very cheap technology. A leaf color chart costs something around 10 to 12 rupees only. So you test the leaf based on the different crops and then apply the fertilizer so that we reduce the emission losses, gaseous emissions, and we improve the nitrogen efficiency. And then slow release fertilizers are there, so which can help in reducing the emission of from the agriculture sector, which are based on fertilizer. And these are certain technologies which can reduce the emissions. But for agriculture sector, the main thing is based on the climate change, we are having a lot of effects. So we go for adaptation, and whatever mitigation co-benefits are coming, we should harness those instead of straight away going for the mitigation technologies. I think I was able to answer all the questions that you asked.
So, I mean, this may be considered as my closing remarks and answer to the friend who asked about the city level state action plans. First of all, I fully understand and appreciate what Mr. Ajay Raghav said. We are not in contradiction. We are on the same line. my simply suggestion and submission was that while we do the state action plans, we must have information on the greenhouse gas inventory. Either we do it, somebody else does it, but we need to factor in the emission related data and information in our while we design the policy on climate actions. That was my submission. And I understand that if the states are being allowed or if they are carrying out any studies, it has to be very robust and the data has to be very, reliable, and somebody has to own the responsibility. I fully agree and appreciate first. Secondly, the city level action plans. So first is the state action plan. And there are many, organizations, groups which are encouraging to carry out the city level state action plans. I fully appreciate and welcome these initiatives. And I understand the importance, especially for the smart cities, where you have the important framework of the climate smart city assessment framework given by the Ministry of Urban and Housing. So, but again, the question comes of the city level inventories. And there are certain organizations, we are carrying out the city level inventories, and there again, we need a clarity from the Government of India, Ministry of Urban and Housing, that should we be carrying out these kinds of city level inventories. But it is important. And in order to make any smart city, a climate smart city, we need to know the information about the kinds of emissions that are emanating from the particular city and where some interventions can be taken up. So we are also doing this kind of work in state of Madhya Pradesh. We for the 7 smart cities, we are carrying out these kind of assessments with the help of WRI. And we have also developed the district mitigation plans thanks to Vasudha for Indore and Bhopal, which we recently launched and which are being used by the state policy making process. So these are my 2 interventions, and anything else we can discuss on the sidelines. Thank you.
I don't have more important thing to say, but we had been talking a lot about information and data. And being an engineer, and many of you are either scientists or economists, data becomes critical, important for our research work. But one part is generation of data, but the second part, which is, I believe, is more important, that what happens to those information which has been called out and then analyzed and then up there available somewhere. So how to disseminate that data, disseminate that data in a way which is understandable by someone who is not a scientist, who might be a bureaucrat, who might be a politician, who at the end of the day will be taking decisions. So that would be one thing we need to understand better. The second is that we are often in the race of doing something new or novel, we run around and set targets for ourselves. Often those targets are such that, and I'm talking about cities, states, districts, targets which are aspirational to the level that it becomes utopian. So whenever we set targets, we should be also mindful that what can be done based on the local realities, or otherwise what happens that one city has set target and the other city will be also setting certain targets which are kind of a competition and then not really built on the local realities of that specific area or the city. Again, when we set targets, we also need to understand that how we will be achieving those targets, where the financing will come from, where the technology will be coming from, whether you have the enough expertise within the city or within the country to even do what we are suggesting to do. Those are things we need to understand while we utilize information and come up with reports. Otherwise, we had developed enough reports across the board, and many of those reports are lying there and gaining dust. So going forward, we have very limited time available with us to react, and climate change is an inevitable challenge which is up there on our face. We as human community are doing very little, as I understand. And it's not only India, but it's across the globe. We are doing very little. one war in Europe and everybody goes back to coal. Nobody is really ready to do compromise on their lifestyle. मुझे heating चाहिए. I need heating throughout my house, and my house has to be at 24 degrees centigrade. Even if the outside temperature is 0, I'm not going to wear a sweater, which Indians do, but we will be ready to preach the world. So in retrospective, we need to understand that it's a global issue. It's not an issue which one country can solve, but definitely we all have to do our bit. And it's true for even within the country, we have geographies within the country which are more industrialized. There are geographies within the country which are less industrialized, like the Northeast, which is more or less the carbon sink for the country. So again, how the economic flow happens between the industrialized part of the country to the not so industrialized part, but actually the carbon sink or the lungs of the country. Those conversations also need to be built in at the national level, and that also gets replicated at the international level. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to say this very quickly and stick out like a sore thumb. I think there's a part of our brain that should just accept, just have a conversation, which is, developed countries did this and we have done so little, and therefore we should forget that. That's one part of the conversation. We'll have it at the appropriate forum. There is the other part of the conversation, which is where I think the platform becomes so critical and essential and helpful. And that is, we should see this as an opportunity. And yes, I agree with Subhashish, and I agree with there were other people who made the same point, that not everybody can march to that same tune. But the question is, we all should be marching in the same direction. And I think this is where the data becomes critical, so that you know who is going to be able to, march, at what speed, but in which direction. And I think that's a conversation we should be having. I think we let our, we have this such an interesting sort of treasure trove. We should use that to have the best possible policies for and actions for everybody, so that we are marching in the same direction. We don't have to go for the most fashionable options, but we have to go in that direction where your emissions are stabilizing, reducing, and you're not adding to it. And as I said again, I mean, this is a moment to celebrate the platform, primarily because it allows us to have those same conversations. So maybe that's what we need, more sane conversations about where we can be and the opportunities we have.
Thanks, Urmi, for those words. And yeah, there's always two sides to the coin. And we appreciate your comment. Srini, you wanted to say something, and then I think Mr. Subramaniam, and then we'll just find out.
My point is basically to Ashok, who has come from the government. And I spent nearly 4 decades. And one of the things that I'm observing, I've been out of the government for more than a decade and a half. One of the things I'm observing is increasingly it's becoming a question of states having to comply with the desire of the union. I mean, there's a divided almost every sector of the government. Subjects that are in the state list and concurrent list, the initiatives are being taken by the union. And somehow there's an increasing feeling that climate change is the responsibility of the union government, and the states do not have much to do. There are interested, enthused, committed people in this room. But how many people really know about the climate change issues? I think it's high time the government of India had a proper consultation process, not only on data, but on strategy, and produce a white paper on the subject as to what needs to be done, what are the actions of the union government level, state government level, local government. This is something we need to do. A white paper, I mean, I don't want directions to be issued. A consultative process. And the second thing, I have worked with the politicians for decades. I haven't seen the case of any of them during the last 14, 15 years. In fact, I don't want to meet you. but they are the greatest communicators in this country. And the way in which they communicate to the public, not many of us can. Not government, not the NGOs, not. There should be a strategy to sensitize the politicians at all levels on climate change. All those graphs and all the on the PPTs. I'm a very seasoned civil servant. I don't understand much of it. But how do you want to translate that in simple language and go across to the panchayat leaders, the municipality chairman? How do you educate them so that they communicate further to the people and have proper orientation? That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Mr. Subramanian. Srini, you want to make the concluding remarks? Then we'll wind up. We are already running very late.
Yeah, sure. I just want to make two quick remarks, comments. And it sort of stems to, or it sort of comes from what Subhashi said and what Ajay said. One is, you're right, absolutely right, Subhashi, we have all the data, but if people don't use the data, what do we do about it? So we have actually come up with a good outreach. Right. And the first step what we did was, and I do not know if people observed it, but we actually revamped the entire GHG platform website. It is a much different and newer. The reason is that we felt that, you know, the previous avatar had a lot of data, it had all the information, but then, you know, the kind of information that is easy to use, the infographics was missing. So this time we ensured that there were a whole lot of infographics, there were a whole lot of information that, you know, is easy to take, easy to use by all. So that is something that we did. Second, and this sort of is response to you, Ajay, is that you know, we've been having a conversation with a lot of states in the past few days. And in fact, I was traveling and I just came this morning. There is an appetite from almost all the states that we've spoken on getting a GHG inventory done. And the GHG inventory, I wouldn't even call it an inventory, I would call it more of a GHG estimations done, so to speak. And this sort of is the first step to a, you know, a net zero visioning that a lot of states want to have. So they want that as part of the net zero visioning. And so there is an appetite, and a lot of states are promising to sort of anchor it in either the climate change department of respective states or whichever department, and also willing to do the data, give the data for it and make it more robust. And the trend analysis that we have, state trend analysis that we have, would be sort of the starting point, so to speak, of the baseline. So there is that appetite, and this is not just the big states. It is from the small states to the last state. There's a lot of you know, requests that's coming out here. So now that you said that, you know, big states could do it as long as they follow the authority, as long as they own it. That's sort of would be very encouraging for us to actually work with the few states to develop that way forward. The other thing that I wanted to also say is that as not part of the GHG, but as part of other work that we're doing with NITI Aayog, where we're actually creating a So that would have data from the entire power sector, the energy sector space. It would have data from the climate space. It could be the GHG emissions from the NatCom 1, 2, 3, NatCom 1 and 2, and VUR 1, 2, 3, and maybe NatCom 3 if that's out whenever it's ready. And then it would also have climate variability data from the IMD. It would have a whole lot of information on the climate, plus on the key economic indicators. The whole idea is to have a comprehensive dashboard that would bring the various elements, you know, in order to help for a net zero modeling for the net zero models. So this is something that I just want to tell just how that, you know, that's something that is should be ready very soon. October, the launch the first phase of this, and then, you know, and this itself will house
a wide range of data that we use.
No, so I think we close now because we're running very late. There was a lot of maybe follow-ups and other questions that may have come up from this discussion. So apologies for that, but we are pushed for time. And please have lunch with. I hope I can bring this meeting to a close. Yeah. So let's bring it to a close. Let's not keep you from lunch. Please have lunch. And hope to be in touch with you all, in the future. Thanks very much.